Well, Prime Minister Mark Carney and his cabinet will officially be sworn into office next week. Governor General Mary Simon will preside over the ceremony at Reid Hall on Tuesday. Carney reduced his cabinet to 23 people when he took over from former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, but it's not clear if that number will change. Carney has previously pledged to keep Trudeau's gender parity rule that maintains an equal number of men and women. Their priorities are expected to include the trade war with the U.S., implementing tax measures to boost housing construction, and beefing up border security. And for more on this, we're joined by CTV political commentator Scott Reid. Always appreciate your time, Scott. I'm curious, if you had a crystal ball and you're making some predictions, who's in, who's out?
Well, if I had a crystal ball, I would be selling it for bigger dollars than showing up here on TV, my friend. I'd be downtown in the dark salons of the gambling world. But I think a couple things. First of all, I think people will be surprised by the amount of change. I think that Carney is really focused on change, and not just change for the sake of change. I think that he regards this as a time of crisis. I think that he will therefore have a crisis-built cabinet. So I would look for some change in terms of newcomers. There'll be a balance of old and new, obviously, but dealing with the United States and trying to repair the relationship that seems so badly off the rails thanks to Donald Trump. I think trying to rewire our relationship economically and security-wise with the rest of the world, particularly reaching out to Europe and forging new and better ties in trade and security matters. And then I think obviously he wants to make certain that we move on critical domestic priorities, such as you mentioned, housing and eliminating trade barriers. All of that's going to require people who are focused, people who don't just occupy portfolios, but that get things done. And I think he's going to be looking for those who can come to play.
Scott, how does the Prime Minister make the case for change when he's flanked by all of the same MPs and people who that were by the former Prime Minister's side supporting policies that respectfully didn't work out so well for many Canadians?
Yeah, well, there's just been an election. He's got some new wood to work with. And I think, change starts at the top. And it's a focus that the Prime Minister brings. I think a couple of things. I'd look for a couple of newcomers. Carlos Laito out of Quebec City, former Quebec finance minister. I would expect him to have a senior economic portfolio. Bring in some new blood. Someone that Mark Carney personally recruited, with whom he has worked in the past. Similarly, Tim Hodgson, former chair of Ontario Hydro here, Hydro One, are well-renowned for being able to take on large infrastructure projects and get them achieved, accomplished big and important things. I think I'd be looking for both of those people to play significant roles in this portfolio. And then you're right, there's going to be a mix of people who have proven themselves in the past, and some of whom over the course of the past 2-3 months, and that's all that it's been, that Mark Carney has come to evaluate and found lacking, they may find themselves either on the margins or out of cabinet altogether. Don't be surprised if he's a severe boss who marks people with great difficulty.
Some of the higher profile roles, including Foreign Affairs Minister, Finance Minister. What's your take? Do you think the current ones could be shuffled?
I know there's a sort of a default assumption that those people remain in their places. They're, relatively familiar faces we deal with the United States. I don't think anyone's job is safe. Do not for one second think that we should take it as a lock that those who served previously as Finance Minister, Foreign Affairs are going to stay there. And you've got some talent, obviously, in someone like Melanie Joly or somebody like Dominic LeBlanc. LeBlanc, in particular, has forged good working ties with the United States. I doubt that the Prime Minister will squander that talent and that goodwill. But I don't think any of those seats are safe. I don't think any of those spots are safe. I think you're going to see some people lose their jobs, move their jobs, and some are going to be shaken up for sure.
I want to get your take on the fact that the Prime Minister says that he's going to keep Justin Trudeau's gender parity rule that maintains an equal number of men and women. That is something that came under great scrutiny by a lot of people who felt that he was essentially just playing identity politics and putting people in positions that might not have the skills, experience, and capabilities to match those positions. What's your take on that?
Carney's got 168 people to pick from. I think that he can fill a cabinet with 30 people, including half women who are talented. So I think actually that's just trash talk from people on the sidelines. The question is going to be whether, in the process of picking that cabinet, it isn't going to be about gender parity, it isn't just going to be about regional balance. It's going to be whether or not this Prime Minister strikes a completely different tone than Trudeau and saying, listen, we've got 3-4 core priorities. We're a minority parliament. We were coming in here in a time of crisis where our role and our place with the United States and the world is at risk and at stake. We're not going to mess around. We're going to get some things done. I think that's going to be the tone. If he meets that tone, gender parity is the last thing any of us are talking about. If he fails to meet that tone, gender parity is the last thing any of us are going to be talking about. I think that is effectively a new rule, unwritten rule of putting together cabinet, and that ain't going to be the big issue. The big issue is whether or not these people can come together and move the yardsticks in a significant, substantial way in 6 to 18 months.
When Carney took over, he reduced the cabinet to 23 people. Do you think it could get smaller, or do you think it'll get bigger?
The buzz around is 28, 29, 30, so a little bit larger, which makes sense. He's got a little bit more room to work with. I wouldn't take a huge ton of cues from that first cabinet. I mean, essentially, he was just patching things over until he was in a position to work with his own mandate. He has that now. So I think you'll see regional and other considerations cause him to increase the size of cabinet slightly, but by no means as large as you've seen under the previous two governments. I think he's going to make this, as he says, efficient. So I think it's going to be a little more focused, a little more lean. And that's an important, maybe boring for people, Jamie, but it's an important point. I think you're going to see him collapse and mix some of the departments together. Like, look for whether or not we have a department that's dedicated, a minister that's dedicated to Canada-U.S. relations. Look to see whether trade and foreign affairs are combined as they have been in the past. So I'll be looking to see for some of those changes as well, which allow the Prime Minister to reduce the number of ministers and increase the amount of pressure and accountability he puts on all who sit around that table.
Scott, while I have your ears, I want to get your take on the fact that President Trump inked a deal, at least a framework for a deal with the UK yesterday. And I'm wondering if you think that is promising news, hopeful news for Canada, that they would also be successful moving forward in trying to renegotiate NAFTA.
I'm glad you asked, because my honest answer is yes and no. And here's why I think it's important and why it's encouraging. I think that Donald Trump can read polls. I think he knows that his poll numbers are in the sand. I think that he knows he was elected to manage the economy, keep it growing, and keep jobs growing. And he has failed at that, and people are noticing. So I think he is eager to make deals and demonstrate that this self-inflicted wound of tariffs can yield something positive. So I would look for more deals. The only hesitation I would have and caution I would have is that he's really focused on auto, and that's going to be tough for Canada. We're going to have a lot of work to do. Even if the president is eager to strike deals, he still thinks that the North American auto sector, which has been built up over 60, 70, 80 years, is an affront to American interests, and that every single one of those plants ought to be in the United States. That's going to be a tough negotiating issue to get around.
Scott, I'm actually going to squeeze in one more question. And when it comes to putting together this team of MPs, when it comes to international affairs, you not only have ongoing wars in Ukraine and Israel and Hamas, you now have a new conflict brewing between India and Pakistan. How important is that role of foreign affairs and international relations going to be moving forward for this Prime Minister?
Well, it is important, and we are seeing wars break out all over, and India and Pakistan is worrying in terms of geopolitics, especially if the United States has decided to vacate the field, doesn't want to play its usual role as the superpower that can force heads together and diffuse conflict. So it's going to be important, but again, I come back to it. Canada has interests there. We have broader interests and we have direct interests, but I do think that Carney is going to be a guy forged in crisis. That's what brought him to the Prime Minister's chair. I think he's going to keep us focused on those 3-4 central things that really matter. Things like getting our economic relationship with the United States back on track and rewiring our relationship with the rest of the world. Security is part of that. But I don't think you're going to see grand initiatives to try to be peace brokers all over the world. We got to be more concentrated in the days ahead.
C2B political commentator Scott Reid, always appreciate the chats. Have a great weekend.